And welcome to episode 2 of Self Pub Sunday. Today we're joined by my lovely friend Helen Rygh-Pedersen to talk about her new novel that just came out this past week, The Briar Crown. Welcome, Helen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
We had such a great time talking about Waking Ursa Minor last year that I had to have her back again. So we're going to talk some spoiler-free at the beginning for those who haven't read The Briar Crown yet, and then we'll go into spoiler chats and talk some details about The Briar Crown. So thank you guys for joining us today. We have Channing joining us from Germany and Stephanie from the US. So let's talk spoiler-free. What should readers know going into the Briar Crown?
Well, firstly, that it is a fantasy romance that is, the main sub-genre, which was a new one for me. So, and it is a little bit spicy. So if that's not your thing, then maybe you skip this one. Although I'm sure for some people it probably isn't spicy enough. And it's a book with I think a real sort of classic fairy tale vibe. It is actually a fairy tale retelling, but a lesser known fairy tale. If you like fairy tales, spies, romance, then maybe give it a go.
Where did you? So you said this is a fairy tale retelling. Where or how did you come up with the idea for this book or series?
Well, there's a few things that sort of come together in this. At the time, I'd just finished, I'd released Waking Ursa Minor. I'd just finished the first draft of book 2 in that series. And I was kind of exhausted. But I wanted to carry on writing, but I needed a break from that world because there's so many points of view, so many characters, more coming. And I just wanted to write something quick and simple and fun. Not that Waking Ursa Minor wasn't fun, but it's different.
Fun tone. In a different sense.
Yeah, and so I was kind of on the lookout for something that I could do, and I thought, oh well, why not do a fairy tale retelling? But it was a bit like a lot of people have done Beauty and the Beast and Sleeping Beauty and the real sort of well-known ones. And I didn't want to do anything like that. And then when we moved into our new house, I was unpacking my daughter's books and I found this book, which if you haven't read it, it's actually pretty good. And in this book is a fairy tale called The Nettle Princess, which is based on the Grimm's fairy tale Maylene. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. So that's the fairy tale it was based on, but I was attracted to it because at the time I also had this obsession with nettles going on. I was learning about their properties. I was learning that you could make cloth from them. I even went so far as to go out, get some nettles, ret them on the lawn, get the fiber from them. I didn't get around to spinning it, but I got fiber from them. So
That's
yeah, when I go down a rabbit hole,
yeah.
So all of that kind of came together in time for Camp NaNoWriMo last year. And I just...
So you would say the story came first before the characters?
I don't know. It's a bit difficult because I kind of had a few characters just making themselves known, but I didn't have a story to put them in yet.
Right.
And then when I found that, it all clicked and fell into place. So again, it's a bit of it all just, it was timing, it worked out well. Yeah. I think about things a lot and for a long time. So I'm never exactly sure when when it happens.
Yeah. Are there any other spoiler-free thoughts that you want to talk about with the Briar
Crown? I'm not sure. I guess for those who haven't read it, I could give you a brief sort of summary. So it is set in Domovnia, which is a country where people have magical powers, the affinity linked to plants, and they have this power because they are the descendants of dryads and naiads. But 25 years before the book starts, the country is invaded by their neighbors to the north, and they kill the royal family, and they really sort of subjugate these people who have this affinity, placing the human Domovnians above those who we call the descendants. In the story, we meet our heroine, Rosalind Plavelli, and not only is she looked down upon by the invading rulers, but she's also looked down upon in her society because there's levels to this sort of magical hierarchy, and she is right down at the bottom, able only to sort of command or borrow power from a few weeds, so nettles and dandelions. And then one day she meets an injured man in the woods, and of course, as any good person, and she's a healer as well, would do, helps this man. And in doing so, she changes the path of her life, shall we say.
So with that, we'll say it's really hard to talk about this book without talking about spoilers. So if you haven't read The Briar Crown yet, we won't shame you yet because it just came out a couple days ago. But you should go read it and then come back and watch the rest of our chat. But thank you for joining us for the spoiler-free section of this chat. If you have read The Briar Crown, stick around because now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty, the spoilers of this book. So, with that said, who was your favorite or the easiest character to write in this book?
I loved writing Lady Margit. She was so funny. Yeah, and I can't get her out of my head, so you will probably be seeing more of her in the future. But yeah, she was just so much fun to write. I know some people think she's pretty despicable, but other than that, I guess Rosalind, really, because it's all from her point of view. You know, I was really with her throughout the whole thing, so I guess I have to say Rosalind, really.
Yeah, I feel like Lady Marguerite kind of was redeemed herself a little bit at the end, though. You know, when we first met her, she was despicable and flatulent. But I feel like towards the end of the book, she didn't come full circle, but she started to have a redeeming.
Yeah, she
completely misread that.
No, she's not meant to be completely despised. She has quite a sad backstory, sad in places, which explains why she is in some situations. And then, of course, unfortunately, as happens to many people as they get older. She does suffer from the early stages of dementia in the book. So a lot of her sort of story and how she's reacting is kind of mixed up with that. So when you actually discover that about her, you're like, oh, okay, that might be why she does or says certain things.
Even though that was, one of the sadder parts of the story as a whole, I was raised in nursing homes practically. My mom's run nursing homes my entire life, and 2 out of my 4 grandparents suffered from Alzheimer's and dementia. And seeing a character portray dementia in the way that you did really resonated with me, because a lot of times when authors try to write characters with dementia, you only see like one side of it, and you don't see the fact that most of the time when people talk about dementia, they just talk about the mental part of it. But when someone has dementia, it's not just their brain is going, their memory is going, but their entire body starts to shut down, and they lose control over all of their bodily functions. And so to see you portray dementia in all of its aspects really resonated with me, because it wasn't just, at first when we met Lady Marguerite, she was kind of the comedy along this crazy ride that Rosalind was going to the castle with, and she was that character that had the flatulence and everything. But then once you brought the dementia in, I'm like, this makes complete sense to me, knowing that all of this actually does happen with dementia.
But she's still at the stage where she's aware of herself, and she's obviously embarrassed, and she's supposed to be a noble and of higher birth with better manners, or so she's but I didn't want to sort of, it's not a book about dementia, so I wanted to highlight some things but not go too deep, because obviously it affects people in different ways. People have different experiences with it, but I think it's also important to give a reason as to why people, especially some elderly people, do behave like that, like rather than just making her this crazy old lady. But yeah, it also stylistically, or in an author world, gave me a way to then it opened a door to her past as well.
I thought you balanced it really well. It didn't feel like a dementia novel, but it gave a certain aspect to Lady Marguerite that readers could kind of be able to see her in a different light than just this grumpy, crazy old lady. Everyone has different facets to their personality and why they act the way they do. And I can't wait to see what you have further for Lady Marguerite. Who was the hardest character to write?
I think actually that was Frederick to some extent, because I needed to make him kind of not immediately likable, but he's got to be likable enough that she falls in love with him, and hopefully the reader does as well. So I found balancing that quite difficult. But as I said, I'm very new to this romance subgenre, so I'm learning a lot. My critique partner, Abby Fox, who's also an author, if you haven't checked her out, go do so. She was absolutely fantastic. She did comment a few times like, we're missing a few scenes here. We need to actually have a reason why they're falling in love. I was like, yeah, that would be good. So yeah, she was absolutely fantastic. So he was probably the most difficult one, and a few people in the beta read, and I don't know if anybody else found this, at certain points they were kind of shipping Rosalind and Captain Dietrich. So maybe my brain was going there a little bit. I don't know.
I loved Captain Dietrich. He was one of my favorite characters. But I never shipped them together.
Okay.
I mean, I can't speak for everyone else, but he was the character that I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's the stoic guard knight character who always has that little bit of like mischief behind him. And then at the end, when the king orders Rosalind to be walled into the tower, and he slips her, you know, the little seeds through the hole as he's walling her in. You could see kind of his struggle a little bit, and he wants to do the right thing and help Rosalind, but he also has to maintain the facade of being, you know, part of the king's and prince's guard. And so you could see that struggle build up a little bit throughout the book, where he's starting to become, you know, friendly towards Rosalind, but then it kind of, you know, comes full circle in the end. I loved his storyline. Did you have a favorite scene to write?
The dandelion field scene. And weirdly, I dictated that scene, and then I put it in put it in to be transcribed, and then there's usually a few errors, or quite a lot of errors with the transcription, so I have to go through that as sort of like a first editing process. And while I was doing that, I put just a random playlist on Spotify, and this song came up, Dandelions. I can't remember off the top of my head who sings it. Randy B or something, but it was the perfect song. It was like watching a movie scene in my head with this song playing and reading and editing this chapter. It was like, oh, this is fantastic. And I think because for me, that's the moment that he really falls in love with her. That yeah, it's special.
Let's see. I always keep track of quotes when I'm reading, and the quote that I wrote down for the Briar Crown, I feel like it sums up Rosalind's character really well. Said, behind the stiff fabric of her stays, smuggling one of the deadliest plants known to man. And that kind of comes around to the end where the king makes her kind of poison him little by little at a time. I had that like first written on it like a little sticky note when I came across it, and then I transferred it to my quotes notebook. And my partner came to my desk one day and just saw that line randomly, and he goes, so tell me about this person with a deadly plant.
Yeah, she knows her stuff.
Yeah, but she also, you know, the thing that I enjoyed most about Rosalind was you could see that struggle in her. She wants to, you know, be the good healer that doesn't harm people, but she's got, you know, this fight with her people on one side, and now she's getting to know, you know, the rulers on the other side and falling in love with Frederick and trying to figure out how to balance these two lives now that she has, essentially. Even though one was, you know, forced on her, she's beginning to get in her groove in the castle and, you know, get to know the people there, and she knows how to easily dispose of them if she has to. But she doesn't do it until she's forced to.
Yeah, I think it crosses her mind several times because she has this loyalty to her people, her country. Obviously, she wants to end what is happening, but she's not a killer. That's
Right.
not in her nature, and she wars with that. And in a way, when Casimir makes her, it kind of solves the problem, but at the same time, not, because he also puts
Yeah.
her in a sticky situation. So, yeah.
I loved the scene where she was walled in, because you saw her kind of realize her true power. She had that moment in the dandelion field with Frederick where he showed her her power, but this was her moment where she had to find it herself to
Mm-hmm.
save herself. Um, and the nettles kind of saved her, and then she climbed up the tower wall, and all I could picture was just like Rapunzel climbing down her hair.
Not that she climbed down, but
Right.
but yeah. No, I
But
mean it's interesting because actually walling usually women into buildings, into towers and things, was actually a surprisingly common punishment in medieval Europe. It was actually in the original fairy tale. It was a princess and her, I think it was a handmaiden, were walled in this tower. They were given supplies though, so slightly better. And then there is an Italian classic, and this nun had an affair with someone, and as her punishment, she was walled up inside a building. And yeah, it did happen. It's very gruesome.
So
Sorry.
no, you're fine. I took very minimal notes, and I've reached the end of my notes, so now I'm trying to think of what else I didn't write down that I wanted to talk about. For those out in the chat, let us know in the chat who your favorite character was, what your favorite scene is. If you have any questions for Helen, feel free to throw them in there. While we wait for the people in the chat to catch up, Helen, what can you tell us about maybe future writing projects? So you mentioned you had finished the first draft of book 2 in the Roberta series. Is there anything that you can tell us about any of your future writing?
Well, I'm hoping that book 2 in Reverter Rising can come out this year. It's getting to the point where it needs to get out now, but I do have editing and stuff to do first. So hopefully that will come out this year. And if I really get my skates on, I might have another one in this world much later in the year. But that's not a definite. It's just a hopeful speculation. Yeah. So.
Let's talk about Eek for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Did I say
Ike? Yeah, Ike.
Ike. Okay. So when I was reading his character, my brain kept imagining Gaston from Beauty and the Beast. I wonder where you got the inspiration for his character from.
It wasn't directly from Gaston, but the more I wrote him, yeah, he definitely slipped into that. I think he was more because rather than it simply being this like sweet young maiden who gets corrupted by a charming prince, I wanted Rosalind to have a past. I wanted her to have a lover and see the difference. And so yeah, she kind of had to have a bit of a douchebag boyfriend, really.
And what about Haida?
Heather, yeah, well, again, I guess a classic fantasy, you need some sort of mentor figure. And I think the fact that she doesn't have her own parents, there needed to be some sort of crossover there. There needed to be someone to fill that role. And I was very pleased because one of my beta readers was like, "Oh, we need an extra something here," and she didn't mention Heather, but when Heather comes to the castle, that was another way of getting her in, because other than that, you didn't really see much of her.
Yeah.
But Heather has a lot of information which she doesn't actually give. She just sort of denies knowing, but that gives Rosalind enough information to work things out. And again, she has a backstory which might come up. So
was she always kind of, so if I remember correctly, she was the character that was basically the most human?
Yes, because there are human Demovnians, just they don't have powers.
Right.
Because there is the story that Rosalind tells to Frederick about how the descendants of the Dryads and the Naiads started basically breeding with humans. So some of it is potluck as to who gets powers, or, like with Rosalind, she thinks it's been so diluted over the generations that she hasn't got any at first. So yeah, Demovnians are human, and they're also the descendants of the Dryads and the Naiads.
So Stephanie wants to know about Rose.
Yeah, she was there from the start, but again, that is all thanks to beta readers who this story needs a word that rhymes with witch. I don't know how much you can say on YouTube, but and I was like, yeah, it does. And because I knew she was going to be there at the end, because again, in the well, not so much in the fairy tale, but as I was researching the fairy tale, there was this big sort of, I read an academic paper on the false bride, which was again a thing in medieval Europe. If a woman was promised to a man, but she'd already had relations with another man, then and she was pregnant, they needed to hide that. So they got a false bride in. And I found that fascinating. So I was like, there has to be a false bride who tries to kill Frederick. And it just had to be Rose. I mean, it couldn't have been anyone else.
Well, and it, fits the story because no one knew what this other bride looked like.
Mm-hmm.
They hadn't met her yet. And so, how else are you going to take over the rulers than posing as this bride that no one knows what she looks like? Just steal their clothes and you're fine.
It's kind of handy. They have to wear veils as well. So.
I was amazed that Rosalind was standing next to Frederick and he didn't recognize her at all.
Well, he's consumed with grief. But yeah, she tried to give him hints. I mean,
right. Who else would have a dandelion?
Exactly.
But men are oblivious to things, so.
Well, I had a pretty rough past couple of days, so I think we can let him off a little bit.
Yes, he redeems himself. Stacey wants all of the backstories.
There's stuff planned. There is stuff planned.
Lovingly oblivious.
Mm-hmm.
He had excuses for being oblivious to things.
He did.
I mean, and on your wedding day, you're not going to pay attention to that kind of stuff. You're going to be so nervous, especially as a prince marrying some foreign princess that you've never met before, that your brother was supposed to marry, knowing that you're going to become king. You're going to be so nervous that you're not going to pay attention to those. And he wasn't expecting the princess to be Rosalind. So why would he be paying attention to those little signs? You know, it made sense. It was funny because he was oblivious to everything that she was trying to tell him. But it made sense too when you think about it, because, you know, you're not going to notice all of those things coming when you're not expecting them. If he was expecting it, or even hoping it to be Rosalind, then, you know, that would be different. But he was told that Rosalind was dead, so he wasn't expecting her to come back from the dead.
No.
So Stephanie is a big Frederick fan. I loved your little profiles that you put together of the characters on Instagram, because it really helped kind of give images to our characters.
It was really fun to do. I've never really done that before, but I think I might have to do it going forward, like as part of my planning stage. But yeah, Captain Dietrich was a hard one to pin down. And I don't think I quite got it right, because he's just so set in my head.
Yeah.
And I could not find a picture that even halfway. So.
Is there anything else that you want to talk about for the Briar Crown? Or Waking Ursa Minor? It doesn't have to be just Briar Crown.
Oh, I don't know really. Only that I just hope people enjoy it. That's all. Give it a go. Hope you like it. But yeah, it was interesting to do. I know authors are supposed to finish one series before they start another, but it does give me a break, I think, and I can kind of swap between the two, because as much as my head is bursting with stories for Zemkoska right now, I know that maybe in a couple of months I might be like, okay, I need to just have a bit of a break and go back to something else. So yeah, I'm kind of glad I broke that rule. But as long as, you know, I don't want to keep readers waiting, but at the same time, I am writing 2 series, so just bear with me.
Be patient. We'll be patient. If there's anyone out there in the chat that has any more questions for Helen, now is your time. If you've got burning questions, send them through and we'll see if Helen answers them or not. I am definitely excited for book 2 in both of these series. Waking Ursa Minor was one of my favorite books I read last year, and I think people are probably sick of hearing me talk about it at this point. Just the world building in it was just really, really well done.
Thank you.
And although the Briar Crown was a different world, a different genre than Waking Ursa Minor, it still gave us, at least for me, that, you know, kind of holdover to keep me enticed with your writing until we get book 2 from Waking Ursa Minor. So I will forgive you for writing 2 series at one time. But I also say, you know, it's your books. There's suggestions that people give for writing, but they're your series, they're your books, and so you write them however you want. If you know.
I mean, especially with writing an epic series, you have so many characters, you have so many threads to weave together, crumbs to drop for later, and stuff like that. Yeah, it's tricky, and that's another reason why I was like, I want to write something else so that I can give it to the readers in the meantime, because it might take longer than I think to get the next book out. I'd love to do one per year, but they're big books.
Yeah.
It's complex. It's so yeah, it's
Well, I absolutely loved it. I can't wait for book 2 in both of these series. I know a lot of my friends loved it, Stacy and Channing and Stephanie. Are there any last words that you want to throw out there to readers?
Just a huge thank you to everyone who's read it so far, and the feedback has been kind of overwhelming. So thank you for being my guinea pigs with this experiment, I guess.
It came out well, a good experiment.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a standalone. And that's clearly not going to happen. But at the same time, I think it's going to, I want to try and write it so that they can be read as standalones, or you can dive in at any stage and not be completely lost.
Right.
Because, you know, I like to do things easy, obviously.
Well, thank you to everyone out there who joined us today, and to everyone who is watching this back later. If you haven't read The Briar Crown, go out and get it. It's out now. It came out on the 18th. So go out and get it and come back and let us know in the comments what your favorite moments were from The Briar Crown. And we look forward to book 2 in both of these series.
Hopefully this year.
Hopefully this year, but we understand if not. So thank you, Helen, again for joining us today. Next Sunday, we'll have episode 3 of Self Pub Sunday, where we'll be joined by Jordan Darrett, who wrote the 7 Blades in Contempt. And he'll be talking about his next book coming out soon. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see y'all next time. Bye.
Bye.